This is Start, Grow, Manage, where we help managed service providers achieve the impact, freedom, and wealth you imagined back when you started your company. At Start, Grow, Manage, our tools, practices, and processes help you engage, energize, and execute on building a business that empowers an extraordinary life. Learn more about our programs and how they can fuel your fire at startgrowmanage.com/learn more. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Start, Grow, Manage podcast. I am Joe.
And I'm Jeff. And I'm actually Jeff.
No, I don't buy it. I don't think so.
See, here's the thing about AI systems that I discovered when I was relegated to the back room watching television, is that we actually control the on and off switch. So all you have to do is turn the electricity off.
Oh,
And the AI is gone, man.
so what happened to all the kicking and screaming I heard in the background the whole time?
It took me a while to get to the circuit breaker, but once you get there, it's not. What was that movie? Like the Terminator or Arnold Schwarzenegger with?
Yeah, Terminator 3.
No, the one where like it was all the trucks that took over.
Oh, that was the Stephen King one. Oh God, I know the movie you're talking
Yeah,
about.
but see, it's not like that. Here we can absolutely turn ChatGPT off. So if you hear screaming in the background, it's absolutely positively not Jeff. Good. So today we've got Hartland Ross. So Hartland Ross is the president of eBridge Marketing Solutions, and he has been supporting MSPs in growing through marketing, and also has a really interesting business. I guess it's a business or a side hustle. We'll get into that. Helping them grow through acquisition and actually get out of their businesses through divestment. Hartland, welcome to the Start, Grow, Manage podcast.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And yeah, looking forward to our chat this afternoon.
Yeah, me too, especially. And this is the thing that I really wanted to talk about. It's really the most important thing that I saw in your LinkedIn profile. Tell me a little bit about Grouse Mountain.
You saw? Oh, okay. I know what you saw. So we're based in Vancouver, British Columbia, which if anybody knows anything about us, it's sort of the mountains meet the water. And so we've got mountains in the backyard, and you can ski and look down on the downtown city core any given time. And there's a ski club up there that my kids are involved in, and I coach skiing on the weekends during the winter.
You just made a brand new best friend.
That's so cool. I happen to be a big skier. I'm just stuck in New York, unfortunately, where they have these little molehills that they call mountains.
Yeah.
And it's really sad, I gotta say. But I've been dealing with the fact that out west, where I like to go skiing, we're up at about 800 inches of snow this year. And that's pretty much what I call paradise. Have you guys been in the same situation?
Nothing like Tahoe and the pictures that I've seen. That's just off the charts. It's just incredible. We get a lot of snow here. Not that much, but it's also not so concentrated, and nor is it regularly there. But anyway, we've had a good season. It's better than some. I wouldn't say as amazing as others have been, but it's definitely been a good season. And skiing here, because of the volume of snow we get, will continue for some time. In fact, it goes until about the end of May in Whistler, which is about an hour and a half from here.
Palisades, which I used to call Squaw Valley, but we had to change their name to Palisades. They have promised to be open through the July 4th holiday. So they will be open through the first week of July. I will say that years like this, when they're open until July, the skiing is pretty bad on July 4th. Like, they've taken whatever snow's left and made a little pile out of it, and there are 2 or 3 people going down the snow. But it's one of those things where they say, we're open on July 4th.
And the little runways.
Exactly. And everybody's lined up in a single file. But cool. So I love that Grouse Mountain and coaching skiing. So what tore you away from the mountain to get into this world of marketing MSPs if you're so close?
Yeah, we've been at it for a long time. And truthfully, I'd love to say it was a little bit more strategic than it actually was. We began in 2000. I began the business, and 2001, excuse me.
So you've been at this for a while.
Yeah, after the Twin Towers and 9/11, I began the business, and our focus at the time was really providing marketing services to B2B online kind of solution providers for small business. Okay, that was really the focus because the adoption was there It could be sold through e-commerce. You could purchase whatever it was with a credit card. So these were subscription type services. And we found we got a lot of traction with web hosting. And so people needed to get their site up. Everybody needed to get online. And so for $5 a month, $10 a month, you could get yourself online. So you got a website. So we ended up working with the likes of GoDaddy and HostGator and Lunar Pages and Bluehost and all of these kind of reasonably well-known shared web hosting companies. And so over time,
but this was back then in the days when we were creating websites with Dreamweaver. And didn't Microsoft have a thing like you could create a website in Word and then it saved it and it looked terrible?
I believe you could. Yeah, I never did that, but you're right. It was Dreamweaver. It was some of the HTML editing tools. It was Cold Fusion, this type of thing. Very much, yeah, feels another lifetime, but that's where we started.
Remember how impressed we were when you could divide the screen up into the multiple screens?
Yeah.
And we thought that was so cool, and it turned out that was really a dumb idea. And so then we all had to go back to tables, and that was like, but we all had like different screens all filled out. So that's your world where you started.
Yeah, so we started working with the hosting companies and then got a lot of traction there, helped a lot of them to grow. I worked with the founders of virtually all of those businesses personally. And as they started to grow continually, we were helping them. They, in some cases, moved up the stack themselves in terms of providing more of a managed type of offering. And then they introduced us to some of their partners upstream. So we ended up working with dedicated co-location service providers, which led us into data centers. And then cloud came along and the whole virtualization. And so we started working with those providers.
So who would you say, like today, who would you say your target customer is, your ideal customer avatar?
At this point, we still work with every group that I just mentioned, as well as the ancillary sort of services to the industry, whether there's be vendors, ISVs, if you like, to the space. And then as time went on, we started working with managed service providers as well. So, I mean, in terms of our ideal customer at this point, it's recurring revenue model businesses, which would include SaaS historically here, but that's not been so much of our focus because we tend to focus more on service-based businesses. So it's recurring service-based business models. So MSPs, web hosting, infrastructure, they may be on a contract, the customer, or they may not be. But the point is they're paying every single month for a service, which has reasonably high switching costs in most cases.
You're doing voice too and SaaS and all the others that you know, you're doing all the other MRR ancillary MSP services.
Right. So as long as it falls under those services that IT service providers would typically provide, backup solutions, Office 365, security solutions, etc. So those vendors, of course, have a recurring SaaS type business, but their customer is the IT service provider, the MSP and whatnot. And so our clients are, for the most part, those IT service providers. But we've absolutely done work for some of those vendors as well over the years. And
what is the problem that you solve for them? So you're working primarily with the MSPs, the service providers, right?
Yeah.
We always talk about the person you're solving the problem for and the problem that you're solving for them. So what would you say the problem is that you're solving for them?
In the early days, it was a bit of a land grab, right? Try to put a stake in the ground and to try to get as much market share as quickly as possible. And so we were helping companies do this organically through marketing. But as time went on, the costs went up because it became more of a competitive environment. So everybody and their uncle was starting a hosting business and was coming online, and people were coming out of the woodwork. And so it didn't take very much to throw up one of these businesses. And so the cost to acquire a customer we're getting to the point where it wasn't workable
for the MSPs,
for the hosting company or the IT provider, whoever. The cost.
So how were you acquiring customers back when you were doing this?
So most people would say it was Google, right? And yes, it was Google to some degree, but Google was also one of the more expensive ways to go about that process, and the costs were going up there. So our sort of value was bringing opportunities to our customers that weren't so well known. It wasn't running Google. It wasn't paying for social ads in the beginning. So there were no.
Yeah, there were no 20 years ago. There was no such thing as social ads.
Yeah.
Right? No, it was just all search.
MySpace.
So it was ads, right? It was banner ads. It was embedded links. It was sponsorship opportunities. It was newsletter ads. It was affiliate deals. It was all of those types of things. But now you got to find those. How do you find them? You come to us and say, here's what I do. Here's who I want to reach. How can I reach them? And we had a large kind of network of different opportunities that we would work with our clients on. So we would manage those.
What would you say is different now in the marketing landscape from them? We've moved beyond banner images, but it's almost like they've come back as well, right? Like with remarketing, the putting images in content and that sort of thing. But it's interesting, that trajectory from 20 years ago today. What do you think are the big shifts?
The reason that we don't do that much of that anymore, and we're still very active from a marketing perspective, we're just not doing those same tactics, is that frankly, over time, they became less effective. So banner ads were less effective, sponsorships less effective, newsletters weren't getting open. So let alone like seeing the ad, they weren't opening the newsletter to be able to see the ad in the first place. So they click on the ad. So it was a trickle down effect. And again, the costs were going up because the cost for acquisitions were going up. And of course, the vendors, the publishers, if you like, it's a better term, were not able to generate as much revenue from the same number of visitors to their website or subscribers to the newsletter. So they needed to charge more, but it just created a vicious circle where the ROI wasn't there. And so this sort of all led into answering your other question, which you said in the beginning was, okay, what's the value that we provide? So in the beginning, the value was, we'll help you grow your business and generate leads at a price point that makes sense for you. But over time, that argument became harder and harder for us to fulfill. And then a lot of those companies said, look, we're at the point now where we're large enough that we can afford to just simply buy another company. Do you know anybody who's interested in potentially selling? Because we would like to acquire them. And we had a lot of groups who had gotten to the point where they were burnt out. They hit a capital ceiling. It was very costly, capital intensive, particularly if you're in some of those, you got dedicated servers and data center businesses. So as a result, some of these smaller players decided that they were going to tap out and look to be acquired. And then, of course, the bigger guys who had run that race a little bit faster in the years earlier were at the point where they could simply, from surplus cash from operations, do an acquisition. And it was really by accident that that process fell into our lap.
So that's when you shifted to more of this M&A model, right?
I wouldn't say we shifted more to it. We just added that, and it became additive to the services that we provided. We are very active in that space now.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of the MSPs, some of them, the smaller ones that have been around for a long time, don't have an exit strategy, don't have a way.
Yeah.
So this is a way to think about that. How do I get out? I've been at this for a long time and I don't want to do it anymore, but I can't stop.
Yeah.
I will say that one of the reasons why they're all so tired and burnt out is because A, they're agnostic, and B, they haven't put processes in place, and C, they haven't built the machine, right?
Yeah.
So one of the reasons MSPs end up burnt out and overtired is that they're not putting the pieces in place to have a reasonable business. But I love the idea, but the exit strategy is key, right? So how do you get out of the business?
Yeah, I think this is a fair statement for a lot of business owners that it just at some point they got to do something, but it's not on their horizon right now. And as you said, their business hasn't really been set up for an exit. So I think that's always an important point that I like to make, is to be thinking about ultimately, even if it's 10 years from now, what does that look like? How big do I want my business? What's my business worth now? What might it be worth then? So you could understand, because I have conversations with groups that say, look, I'm interested in selling. I'm burnt out. I'm tired. I'm going through some personal challenges. I need to sell the business. And they have expectations for what they want for the business. And in some cases, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times those expectations are mismatched with the reality of what the business is worth. Absolutely, Joe.
So what would you say drives the value? What's the difference between a business that sells at a high multiple and one that sells at a lower multiple?
There's a bunch of drivers. One of the biggest ones is the size of the business. And sort of commensurate with the size, so revenue, is usually some systematization, because you can't get to that level if you don't have some of these processes in place and operational maturity, if you like, use the service leadership language. But you're going to have that middle layer of management, right? You're going to have those KPIs. You're going to have the different functional areas built out. And so it becomes, as you said, a machine. So they're sort of part and parcel. You can't get to those numbers without having that. But the value is having a large book of business. The value is having a machine that produces, throws out cash. And you have a team in place where everybody's in the right seats and knows their role that's able to do that. That's part of it. There's lots of other elements as well that I'm happy to jump into if you want. There are quite a few of them.
But I think ultimately the idea is you've got some of the systems in place. What is it? What's the word? Systematization?
That's the one.
You systematized your business. You've got the processes in place so that you have something. Without that, all you're selling is a book of clients, right? All you're selling is access to a bunch of people.
If they're on contracts, at the very least, you're selling, if they are, and they're not always, but you are also selling an annuity at that point. It's not just access, but you're selling that book of business that's going to produce an annuity payment for you. And so long as the buyer doesn't mess up the transition process, then those customers presumably will stay on and maybe can be sold additional services or upsold or whatnot, or move to a contract in an auto renew contract or something. The other thing, of course, is that to the extent that there's a team in place, and the team might be a team of one outside the owner, but it might be an employee or 2 or 5 or 10. So you've also got those people who are trained, who know the customers know them. And so long as the employees are happy, then they're going to continue to service the customers typically in a way that the customers will be happy. So you are buying that.
Yeah.
But that's the basics, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say that there's lots of groups that don't have the basics. The customers aren't on contracts. They're serviced by some contractors. There are a lot of non-recurring revenue, maybe project work, break fix work, etc. So the more you have of these things, the more problematic it becomes.
And they're not, I hate to keep going back to having systems in place and systematizing, but if you don't have that, right, what the business is person dependent. And so then when they get bought, at the point that that owner operator leaves, or some of the lead technicians, that they decide that they're not going to make the transition, you can lose those clients and the value goes down instantly. Especially if you're doing an earnout or you're doing some process like that where you just didn't get cash up front for the business. So the more the process that you have in place, the easier the transition is for the client. Right? For the actual clients themselves, they almost don't feel it when it happens. Remember when I sold my last company, we didn't tell anybody for a year.
And then you've done the sale?
Yeah, that we had done the sale. And then a year in, we said, oh, by the way, everybody that because we just brought in all the people and kept operating, and all the new technicians were in, and everybody knew everybody. Oh, by the way, we're changing our name to this now. And we changed our name to a new company. And by that point, everybody knew everybody. Yeah. And it was like done already. It'd been done for so long that nothing changed. If you have the systems in place, you can do it like that. If you don't, you can't. It's impossible.
Joe, when you sold your business, did you work with someone like Hartland? Did you have a broker or something?
I did not, because it did. See,
I wish you did. So earlier he was talking about how he sold his business, and then somebody was on it and said, oh man, how much money did you get? And Joe said, at the end of it, I ended up with $14,000 after he'd done all his debt and everything. So it's one of those things where it does often make.
For my first one, where were you? Where were you in 2003?
Well, he was building websites with Microsoft Word, remember?
Yeah.
I could say you brought up a few points there, Joe. Certainly businesses that are reliant on the owner are more problematic in terms of selling. Everything will sell at the right price, but what it will trigger most likely is an earnout structure, which is, hey, as a buyer, I will pay you, the seller, if and when that customer pays, right? As that revenue is realized, I will pay. So if they're reliant on you, Joe, as the seller, and you leave, and that means the customer leaves, at least as a buyer, I'm not stuck with paying you for a customer that's no longer somebody that I have in my book. The earnout solves that. But if you're looking as a seller to say, I would prefer obviously to have some certainty to this process, then You want to get customers on contracts. You want to remove yourself from that direct line of communication. And I'm a big advocate of what you said, which is, I just call it rocking the boat. Don't rock the boat. I don't really think there's a reason to do a huge announcement in a lot of these cases. Sometimes there is, because things are changing. And particularly if everybody's been phoning Joe, you as the seller with your and support by phoning your personal cell phone, that's got to change, right? But you can say, look, things are changing. I'd like you to now call this number, and somebody else answers and, oh, hey, I'm still around. And a lot of times these acquisitions can be done where, Joe, even if you sold the business, you just need to pop your head up every once in a while to the customers to alleviate concerns that you might have gone. And you say, no, I'm still here. The reality is you're really not active in the business
That
anymore.
was really not. Yeah.
And so it just provides people a little bit of reassurance. But the more you can transition everything over to your team and have it not relying on you, then better it is from a valuation perspective.
We've talked a lot about the seller. What about the acquirer? What's the benefit of acquiring?
So as I mentioned, probably the first biggest one is simply this kind of roll-up model, which is that the bigger the business, the bigger the book of business, the greater the value. And everyone's going to say, duh, that's obvious. But it's more than it's the bigger the business, typically the more profit it's going to generate, the more EBITDA it's going to generate, right? So if you're making, for argument's sake, 20%, then 20% of 10 million is obviously 20 is more than 20% of 1 million. So it is going to be a higher valuation. But the mere fact that you're a larger business gives you that extra bump. So you get a kind of a double whammy effect. You've got a larger multiple on top of a larger EBITDA figure. And so companies who can say, if I'm a $5 million business and I add a $3 million book of business, now I become an $8 million book of business. 8 million immediately will give me a lift. If I do that enough times, then I can turn my $1 million into $10 million book of business, or 15, and then I sell out to private equity or somebody else who's a $50 million MSP, then I'm going to get a pretty substantial lift. So that's the whole idea of doing these.
So the acquirers are growing and growing, so they get bought out eventually as well at a higher multiple to a bigger fish.
To a bigger fish. So this is a very much of a 1 + 1 = 3. It really is. It's your value at 1 plus another value of another $1 million business is not going to be 2. It's going to be, what it would be at 3 million. So that's the idea.
I think that's especially true at the small end, because
there's
typically a lot of efficiencies that come at that early stage as you grow, right? 1 and 1 = 3, maybe 10 and 20 = 25 type of thing. That you really can squeeze your assets a bit more at that smaller stage, especially if you know what you're doing. So if you're acquiring and you've got the systems, you can really squeeze the assets for more value, right?
Go ahead, Joe.
When you have the systems in place and you're the acquirer, you can pick and choose who you're going to keep, what you're going to adopt from the other player. You can then turn your systems in, and the efficiency of that old company, of the company that you're purchasing, goes up sometimes 40, 50, sometimes 200 or 300%. The efficiency goes up so high that the gains, your bottom line goes up from 20% to 30% because you've got the processes in place that they never had. And your purchasing power is bigger. So you can leverage your per seat costs.
Absolutely.
You can leverage all your vendors. You can leverage everybody else in a way that you couldn't do as a smaller player. The bigger you get, the better your buying power is, the more you can leverage all those vendors that are charging you. Everybody's got their hand in your pocket per seat per month. So how do you squeeze those costs down a little bit? And that's one way to do that.
Yeah, so I completely agree with that. I'll also just add that there are sort of these points of inflection. The very small businesses oftentimes can be more profitable. Let's say a $500,000, $750,000, $1 million MSP can be more profitable than, let's say, a $2 million MSP, because they've done away with a lot of things that $2 million MSP might start to now need to put into place. They might need an office that the smaller one didn't need and ran a virtual team with. They may need someone to handle some HR. The legal issues might be a little bit more complicated. They've got some other additional overhead that is going to come with that larger business. But as you go through these points of inflection, it's greater profitability, and then we take a little bit of a dip temporarily, and then we ramp up again, and then we take a bit of a dip and we ramp up again. So the overall point is absolutely true. And at those much larger numbers, it really starts to pay dividends. But in those earlier days, a lot of them are scraping by with not a whole lot of extra
resource. Cool. I think that sounds great. Any advice to our MSPs out there who either want to grow through acquisition or are desperate to get out?
I would say, in terms of advice, if you are a seller, certainly understanding your sort of the limitations of your current business. And look, we're happy to have a conversation with you about, I'm sure that you can go through that also with your listeners in terms of be it the financials, be it the operations. We're not providing coaching services and sitting there a regular kind of cadence to improve these processes, but we can certainly point out some of the challenges. So improving those things, understanding what your business is worth, and then looking at what is the exit strategy. A lot of times MSPs run the business to maximize profit today. For instance, they might say, look, I have none of my customers on contract because I believe that customers should work with me because I want them to work with me, not because I've got them chained to a contract that they can't get out of. So I don't believe in contracts. That's great as an operator because you say these customers have been with me for 10 years and they're not going anywhere. But if you put yourself in the shoes of a buyer, the buyer is going to want to see those contracts. So if you don't have a plan to sell for 5 years, then don't worry about it. But when you do plan to sell, you do need to make sure that these things are shored up or you're going to pay a price in one way or another.
Yeah.
So that's some advice as a seller. And as a buyer, I think you just need to become clear on what you're looking for and have a process. You need to have screening questions. You need to be, as much as the buyer, or you're evaluating the seller, the seller is also evaluating buyers. It's a competitive environment.
Yeah, especially now, it's really competitive with all the roll-ups and everything that's happening. Everybody thinks that their MSP, their $250,000 MSP is worth like $8 million. And you're like, whoa.
I do some angel investing and I come across companies who have zero revenue. They've got a shadow of an idea and they claim an $8 million valuation. So $250,000 in revenue doesn't sound too bad from that.
That's true. An idea with very little revenue out of the gates, you're 3 to 5 at least.
Yeah, no, that's we'll haggle over that depending on how much you need. But no, I think that's great. So anybody who is interested in connecting with you, so we will have in the show notes your URL. It's thehostbroker.com, right?
Correct. Yeah. So our M&A division is thehostbroker.com. You can go there and register for our weekly mailing. It's free to sign up. It goes out on Wednesdays and you'll get notified of new opportunities. If you also fill out what we call our wish list, you tell us what you're looking for, we'll note it. And if and when we have a match, we will reach out to you proactively as well. Oh, that's a backstop in case you missed an opportunity that's published on our list.
And that's for businesses, right? You're not a dating service.
We're not a dating service. Although part of the role that we hold is no question about it, a counselor, because it's an emotional process, selling your business, your baby, moving on, and what is next for you, and oh my gosh, I'm going to be stuck at home and drive each other. Those are conversations to be had. What are you planning on doing next?
It is, especially when you're talking about $1 million, $2 million business, that you end up in marriage counseling, I'm sure, on a regular basis. Yeah. Now, listen, he's going to be home.
Take a deep breath.
You need to get another hobby.
So be sure he gets a hobby or he's going to drive you nuts.
Yeah. Oh, I've had that. I don't usually speak with a spouse, but I hear it through the business owner that if I don't do something, my wife's going to kill me. And it becomes actually an objection to them agreeing to getting a deal done, because if they don't have a backup, they sometimes won't sell.
Now you have to tell us more, because now you went down this road, because you said, I don't usually talk to the spouse, but that means that you have talked to the spouse. And I want to hear that story, because that's a good story.
Sometimes it's a husband and wife team, actually, and they're selling the business together, but she will want to make sure that the person's got something lined up. So as part of the transition, the buyer may provide, if not longer term, at least short term of employment position for the seller to continue to be around and provide that support. If not, they might go out and get another job. And in some cases, they might have started another business already or about to start another business, and they just need to free themselves up.
I know, but what we want is the war story. The one that's making you smirk, that one. I want that war story. You got to tell me that war story, because that's going to be good.
I'm trying to figure out if there's one that would really stand out here. We've got one person, he offered that he was going to work at Home Depot as an interim solution, but
she wanted him out of the house.
What did she say? So
Yeah.
my wife would say, no, you are not working at Home Depot, because she would be sure that I would spend more money than I earn working at Home Depot.
That's true.
No, how many tools do you really need, Jeff? And
Yeah.
I'd be like, no, but this drill,
Right. I don't have one like this.
I don't have the yellow one. I only have the red one. So I guess the last piece of advice is, if you are going to sell, get a hobby and make sure you discuss this with your spouse. So that would be-
Yeah, and I think one other thing that we haven't talked about here, I'll just add in, is the understanding, even if you're not retiring, but particularly if you're retiring, understanding what your business is worth vis-a-vis what you need to retire. That's a big friction point.
Yeah.
Is someone says, I want to sell, and then they find out that after it's all said and done, like you mentioned, Joe, earlier, IRS takes their piece, and then there's legal costs and other things. And what you're left with, is that sufficient for you? And that calculation, it's a discussion to have with your CPA, but what do you need? And really working backwards.
Yeah, because that 14,000 didn't last you too long, did it?
No,
Jeff?
I did about 3 weeks.
Yeah. It really lasted you 3 weeks.
It was in the 90s. No, I was still in New York, but it lasted me about 3 weeks.
Hartland, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for your time. Thanks for hanging out. I look forward to future conversations, and I hope we have a few people who venture over and check out what you're selling and what you're doing over there, because I think it sounds like an interesting thing, both from, like I said, growth perspective as well as an escape perspective. So thank you for your comments and your interesting way of being.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. And yeah, if anybody wants to have a conversation, feel free to reach out. Happy to chat, even if you feel like you're just getting going on the journey and you just want to bounce some ideas. So happy to do that.
Then on that, Joe,
Remember that you are loved.
see you next time.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one right now and tap into our insights and instincts to help drive your business vision and success. Remember, you didn't start your business to feel frustration. You started it for freedom. We can help you discover the impact, freedom, and wealth you always imagined. Learn more at startgrowmanage.com/learn more.